during all the years that I have known and been with Swami Kriyananda, many, many times, dozens, hundreds of times, he spoke about the importance of creating small communities where people could live together and live their ideals together. And he talked, interestingly, he talked about this in India quite frequently, the need to get out of the cities to live a more natural life in the country. And he quoted something that Yogananda said that applies to people anywhere, including in the West, including here in California, to be very specific. And I'm just going to quote this. I'm going to, since it's so well stated that rather than me try to paraphrase it, this is Yogananda speaking, and Swamiji quoted him. Gather together those of you who share high ideals, pool your resources, buy land out in the country. A simple life will bring you inner freedom. Harmony with nature will bring you a happiness known to few city dwellers. In the company of other truth seekers, it will be easier for you to meditate and to think of God. What is the need for all the luxuries people surround themselves with? Most of what they have, they are paying for on the installment plan. Their debts are a source of unending worry to them. Even people whose luxuries have been paid for are not free. Attachment makes them slaves. They consider themselves freer for their possessions and don't see how their possessions in turn possess them. And I thought to just address some thoughts to this buy land, pool your resources, buy land in the country concept in some very practical ways, because we here in Sacramento are actively looking for land in the country. And I thought of several very simple, very kind of obvious scenarios. Some of you may not be aware that other Ananda colonies, urban centers and communities have in fact bought land in the country, bought farmland. And whether there are people full-time living there, even just a small handful, or whether there are many, they at least have those places available to them to come for functions, to come on retreat, etc. And one of the possible ways to do this would be to find, and I have seen, not so much in person yet, but at least I have seen available to purchase, say a 30 to 35 acre parcel that had 6 or 7 subdivided parcels already subdivided within it, which would mean that any one person or family could basically own 5 acres of that land, 5 to 6 acres of that land, and have the deed to that property in their own name. We would collectively create some sort of agreement to show the purpose of our collective purchase, meaning that there would be a spiritual intent and an agricultural intent to some extent as well, of course, because that would be an integral part, growing our own food, not in the sense of being entirely self-sufficient out there, but just as a way of sharing and as a way of being more connected with the land. So that's one scenario. 5 or 6 people. I looked at one parcel and I had this thought. So there were 6 parcels available in that one. 5 of us could take 5 of them, and Ananda Sacramento could take the 6th one. Now, Ananda Sacramento doesn't have the resources to buy a parcel like that, or even necessarily to sustain a mortgage on a parcel like that. But eventually, if we got enough investors together and we put the right package together, we might be able to do something like that, which would mean that we could have a little lodge or a little retreat center out there that would be staffed by a few people, where we could hold functions on weekends or other retreat days, other special days. And in so doing, we would create a very, very basic, very simple way for people to have a place out in the country. And options would include having interns come, having young people come to do training programs out there. People who are interested in organic farming could be farming the land and bringing the produce back to the city for those of us who live here, that sort of thing. And of course, this could go on to include a full-time retreat center or a full-time place where programs and trainings could happen, and even beyond to a full-scale community out in the country. But initially, we would just want to start very simply, very basic. Um, if we could find a piece of land that had a house on it, then we could fix that house up, because presumably we would want to buy one that's not all fancy and done, but would allow us to put our own energy into it. That's how we've always been able to buy apartment complexes. We could never afford new ones. We always had to buy old rundown ones, and then we would put energy into it, our own sort of sweat equity, if you will. And in so doing, we could bring up the energy and have a beautiful vibration there. So I say all of these things because the possibilities, of course, 30 acres or 40 acres is relatively small for a significant group of people. And in some of these other videos, we've talked about the potential need to evacuate our community or even larger areas of Sacramento, possibly for fire or for flood or for other reasons. And it would be nice to have a place to go that's outside of the city, so we're not just refugees in some government camp. For myself, I would much rather host people coming to a place in the country than sort of be hosted by someone else and feel like I was a burden on the system in some way. So those are just simple thoughts. And so it would be nice to have more land than 40 acres, because if you're going to evacuate potentially hundreds of people out to a piece of land, it would be nice to have hundreds of acres to do it on. But these are just initial ideas, but the need is very real. The other day I was out in the country briefly, and just long enough to do some projects that I needed to finish, and spent, a couple of hours, and just to sit and eat my lunch out there. The air was not particularly good. It was a sunny day, but the air was hazy because of smoke and fires. But even still, just to be out in nature in the quiet was such a kind of psychic relief. And so I recommend, irrespective of whether land in the country interests you or cooperative community makes any sense to you in your own experience in your own life, try to spend at least a little time in nature. It is so recharging and rejuvenating. Yes, God can come anywhere. God can come into a factory. God can come onto the freeway. God can come into the noise and commotion of our lives, certainly, and He does and He will. He's as much present and everywhere as He is anywhere. But at the same time, for our own sanity and for our own ability to tune into that presence, it helps to be in places that are quiet. It's one of the things I've always loved and appreciated about our Ananda Sacramento community, is that it is pretty quiet here. People often comment. Of course, the position of our particular building is one among the quietest. And yes, of course, we do have neighbors who make noise and dogs who sometimes bark annoyingly and etc. nearby. We face our challenges too. But generally speaking, it's pretty quiet here. And it's a great blessing to just embrace that quiet. It helps us to experience it more on the inside. So I share these thoughts as a beginning to a much bigger discussion of how to move forward practically with an ideal that Yogananda started expressing. This article and others that he um, and lectures that he gave began in the 1930s, 1932. I remember he was talking about how, in very specific terms, he said families should save $10,000 and they should spend only a little of that on the land, and the rest of it they should be their investment so that they can live on the interest of that money. And I thought, wow, $10,000. Now, I don't know, from the 1930s to the 2020s, I mean, I don't know if that's hundreds of thousands. I don't know how much it is. It's a lot more than $10,000 now. And he was just trying to help us to think in terms of simple living, think in terms of having peace of mind. One of the quotations, he said, spend less and have more. And having more to me means having more sky, having more air, having more nature, trees, view. So often our view is kind of the cell phone in front of us, the computer in front of us. And it's nice, even our eyesight starts to change when we focus so much of the time on something so close to us. And being able to look out into the distance is very important. So I share these things as a kind of an opening statement, but an opening to a conversation that needs to happen in a much more nuanced way among people who are interested. So I invite you who are watching this to connect with us, and let's begin that conversation. God bless you all. Namaste.